with explaining things. So it's
Yeah,
not
but I
like
don't think.
you.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, the PSR, at least in its strong form, is supposed to be that everything that is contingent, or actually everything, like in the if you go by like Leibniz original rendition, is that everything is an explanation. It's just the case that necessary things explain themselves, so they have explanations. But now what you're saying is that look, even if you reject that everything requires an
Bro,
explanation,
I'm so sorry. My kid was crying. Rewind 10 seconds. I'm sorry.
right? Okay, I'll start from the beginning, no problem. So I just would say that like explanatory scope, not depth. Um, Calling that a form of the PSR just is at that point it's just going to be like a semantical dispute, which is not going to be like a substantial dispute between us. Because when I'm talking about the PSR, I'm talking about some kind of a principle that demands an explanation for any contingency. Actually, if you go by Leibniz's original version, it demands an explanation for anything that's a fact or anything that's a true proposition. Because it's only the case that for necessary ones, they're self-explanatory. So they have explanations, they just explain themselves, whereas contingent things are quite outside the explanation, external explanations. Now, that when I say I need an argument for something like that, I'm talking about that PSR. But if all that you mean by the PSR is not something like everything requires a cause, everything requires an explanation, everything that's natural requires an explanation, something, but merely that it's better to have explanations than non-explanations. If you still want to call that a PSR, which we typically call explanatory scope, then sure. But at that point, it's just going to be an aesthetic thing. It's just going to be what term you want to use. It's just going to be like a semantical dispute. It's not
No,
going to
but
be like a
but
substantial dispute between us.
yeah. But someone like Kuhn's he utilizes this very principle or something very close to it to run a complete, good old contingency argument. So it's not like it's not like it's trivial in the sense that, oh, we're just pretending there are explanations and then we can move on and be agnostic about life. It's
Well,
that
I'm not
he
sure if Kuhn has an argument from explanatory scope to God, but as I mean, you have to specify which paper. But
no, I don't mean this
I know,
explanatory scope. You see, what I was saying is that the fact that explanatory scope. Sorry, give me a second. The fact that explanatory scope here is a virtue means, but what that basically translates to is that it's virtuous to explain things, and the more things you explain, the better. Now,
yeah, I agree with that.
yeah. Now I'm saying what that means practically relates to what I was saying yesterday about it being reasonable to simply assume that things have explanations. Obviously, you're not going to like make that like a universal principle that applies to everything, unless it's going to be a Leibnizian principle. But if it's not a Leibnizian principle, and you're not okay with modal collapse, then you could just have that restricted version and just utilize it in the exact same way. It's utilized in certain formulations of the contingency argument.
Oh, but okay, I see what you mean. But the problem is the following, right? I'm not assuming that things. I'm not like practically assuming that things have explanations. In fact, I'm assuming the exact opposite. I'm assuming that a theory of everything is going to have unexplained things. I'm just saying that the less unexplained things, the better. But I'm not taking that as a principle because when you say principle, what I'm taking it to be, at least in terms of PSR, is that. Sorry, give me one sec. Sorry, I'm back. Is that you're saying something as every contingent thing requires an explanation, or this subset of contingent things requires an explanation, whether it's natural or physical or temporal or whatever restricted version of the PSR you have. You're just saying that this subset of things, of contingent things, or this subset of facts require an explanation. Now, I'm not taking explanatory scope to be such a thing. All I'm taking explanatory scope to be is that the less bruteness or the more that is explained, the better, regardless of the things that is explained. And I'm not aware of like anybody who would call that like a kind of PSR. If you would call it a form of PSR, it would just be like a semantical dispute because
But
well,
I
still going
think
to
it
be
is
the
a
case.
semantical dispute. Yeah, I think it
Wait,
is.
okay, but the point I was going to say now is that at that point, the semantical dispute will just be irrelevant because it's not the case that there's like a contingency argument that just relies on explanatory scope to the existence of a necessary being.
Yeah, I'm saying at the end of the day, it's going to be the same when you're comparing theories, like Oppie style, right? Like, so you can compare like a naturalistic theory to a theistic, theory, and in terms of explanation and simplicity, right? And in that sense, like if you look at an Oppian view of a naturalistic theory. He whether you want to call it a PSR or not, he does, but uh, uh, um, but you don't have to. The idea is, as you said, there's a subset of the things in his theory that have explanations, and there's an initial thing that doesn't. And for the theist, it's exactly the same thing. There's a subset of the things in their theory that have explanations, and there's a thing that doesn't. So, so
Okay,
in that
but
sense,
I think there's like a problem here. Do you know the distinction between laws and accidental generalizations?
Um, and no, I mean, I think just by the meaning of the words, yes, I'm not familiar with it, like technically, but I guess I understand what you're saying. But you can explain it in further depth.
Right. So the idea is going to be something like this. For example, take something like um, Einstein's theory of like special relativity or something like that, or general relativity. Let's just take general relativity. That's going to explain something like gravitational waves and like gravity and positions of like planets and so on. It's the fact that the principle is explaining the phenomena, the observational sentence. Then you have accidental generalizations. Let's just say, for example, I go to my fridge right now, I open it, and I see all the beers I have in my fridge are American made. And then I say that all the beers in my fridge are American made. That generalization right there doesn't explain why all the beers in my fridge are American made. If I tell you all the beers in my fridge are American made, I'm not explaining to you why they are American made. Whereas if I give you the Newtonian mechanics or Einsteinian relativity or whatever theory of physics that you have that is going to be law based, that's going to provide an explanation. Even though they have the same structure, both are going to be universally quantified propositions. Now, why I'm bringing this up is the same thing in your case, right? Maybe I can give you a theory of explanations, and then once I give you the theory, you can draw circles within the theory of the things that have explanations and the things that don't have explanations, and you can say, hey, look, this one circle I just drew now, I can assume a PSR for that. But in that case, given that you drew that circle sort of in a manner that's like posteriori to the theory provided, as opposed to like prior, it's going to be hard for me to say how that's not just going to be an accidental generalization as opposed to a PSR, because I take it that the PSR is going to be an explanatory principle and not merely a generalization.
Yes, but this is a problem that's going to apply to both like the naturalistic and the theistic theory. So it's not
Oh
something
no,
that's
no,
just
I agree, but
okay. So, but
the naturalistic one isn't like claiming a PSR for itself.
No, I think it is. I mean, it depends on what do you mean. It depends on what you mean by the naturalistic. I'm specifically because what I brought up was Oppie, right? And if you're explaining a naturalistic theory, like philosophical naturalism and any account of that, it's going to have this exact same problem you're talking about right now. That it's going to have this generalized principle that it works upon in order to come up with this, ultimate theory that's ultimate theory
Oh,
of explanation. Yeah.
so that's what I deny, that there it relies upon some kind of a principle for it to come upon this theory that is supposed to be a form of the PSR. Let's just make the comparison, right? And by the way, I'm not like sympathetic to the OP approach, um, because I think the theory of everything is either just going to be a belief in the foreground, and so in that case, it's going to be like a theory as any other theory, or it's going to literally be a theory of all of your belief, but then it's going to require things in the background, which are going to require the theoretical virtues, right? So it's not like you can take the theoretical virtues and put them apart and then compare everything else, because the theoretical virtues are going to be part of your theory of everything. But let's just bracket that worry for a second because I don't want to get lost.
Sorry, what
So
did
let's
you
take
what
the
did, what did you say
naturalistic.
about the background? Can you just repeat that? Because my son is screaming into my ears. The background
Oh,
part.
okay. So, for example, what Oppie is saying is something like this, right? Let me just take my theory of everything, right? My background theory, because what he says is sort of like giving arguments is kind of useless, because what's going to determine, or what's going to render a premise true or false, is going to be the background assumptions that you have. Um, and so if I give you an argument, you can question a premise. And if I give you an argument for that premise, you can question the premise thereof. And what's going to be doing the work there is just going to be the things you assume in the background, or
Yeah,
what you
but
take to be
remember
plausible or
that that
not.
only matters if I'm trying to convince you. I'm not.
Yeah, no. I agree. I'm just talking about the truth value, not what your goal of the discussion is. But what I'm saying is, um, so what Opie says is like, just skip this problem and just take what you have in the background. But what he's not including in the background are the theoretical virtues or the logic and so on, which I'm going to take to be part of the background. So I think it's not going to be the case that you're going to be comparing in theory everything. It's more so you're just going to be comparing your metaphysics, so to speak, as opposed to like your logic, your epistemology, and so on. But I don't have a
No,
problem
but
with that.
when you
That's
say okay, but okay, look. When you say
hmm
that naturalistic theory explains the data, and
hmm
theistic theory explains the data, and one is simpler than the other. I mean, so in that sense, based on what you're saying right now, I mean, what would you be saying then? I mean, because
oh, I'm getting to that. I'm getting to. All I'm saying is that it's not the case that we're checking our backgrounds. It's just going to be the case that we're checking our metaphysics. But once we take our metaphysics, let's just assume I'm not a naturalist, by the way. Let's just say I'm a naturalist and I'm a metaphysical naturalist, and you're like a theist, right? Um, I offer my theory, you offer your theory, and then we're going to be comparing. Oh, um, here's the experiment, the things we want to be explained. Here's your theory, here's my theory. Right, my theory performs better in this and this regard. Your theory performs better in that and that regard. And then Up is going to say something like this. It's going to say, not just Up, but other people as well, like Gregory Dawes and others are going to say the naturalistic explanation is always going to win because it's going to win in terms of like economical ontology and simplicity and like research programs and so on. And there's nothing that the and there's nothing really that the theistic explanation is going for itself, because the theistic explanation is just going to affirm everything that the naturalistic one affirms, whereas the naturalistic one is not going to affirm everything that the theistic one affirms. And so it's going to be simpler and better and so on, and the other one's going to be more, has a more inflated ontology and so on. But in this case, once they're doing theory choice, they're not appealing to any PSR. All they're going to appeal to is the theoretical virtues. So there's no, the PSR is not doing any work here, unless you just want to call one of the theoretical
no, but
virtues
I
for the
agree. At
PSR.
this point, it won't be doing any work. At this point, I don't think it would be doing any work, right?
Right.
I'm saying that um, basically, based on what you were saying earlier, it would seem like both theories are just completely useless in that sense, as in they're not even like there's no point comparing them. But then if that's the
Wait,
case, then
why?
because all you're saying is that if this principle of explanation is based on stuff in the background, then that's not something you want to build a theory upon, right? And if that's the case, and this problem applies to both theories, then well then that's problematic for you anyway. I mean, so I mean, you could just overlook that and then compare the theories based on what you were just talking about in terms of the theoretical virtue.
No, but the idea, look, the problem with the opposite approach is precisely the, really what's being compared here is the metaphysics. But if me and you, we have overlapping or the same epistemology, meaning we agree on theoretical virtues of abduction, right? In that case, theory choice is going to be completely useful in seeing which of our views is more rational, provided that none of our views entail a contradiction or something. They're like internally consistent. Um, what's going to determine, or what's going to adjudicate between whether my view or your view is the more rational one to hold, is just going to be the theoretical virtues that we both share in the background.
So how would you do that if you can explain just to
Right. So let's just say me and you, we both agree, hey, let's look to the physics, right? And we agree that the way the physics proceed, the theoretical virtues that they accept, um, are going to be like it's going to be like a paradigmatic model of theory choice, right? So we can accept things like simplicity, ontological economy, explanatory depth, explanatory scope. What's the research program this came from? Is it falsifiable or not? Does the theory have novel predictions or not? Once we agree on these things, that these are sort of like the rules of theory choice. These are like theoretical virtues. Then I can take my metaphysics. Let's call it physical naturalism, metaphysical naturalism, or philosophical naturalism. Let's take your view. Let's call it like theism or Islamic theism, and then let's just see how they compare given these theoretical virtues that we both agree are to be held in the background. And in that case, we can agree which view is rational and which view is irrational without even appealing to something like the PSR.
Yeah, but I just think it sounds a lot more simplistic than it is in reality. Like you can look at things like, let's say like, when back to the whole OPI thing because it's a simple theory. Like you could look at something like probabilistic tension, right? That you know, within the theory, that applies to his theory of explanation or his principle of explanation when it comes to contingent things. And well, that's going to be regarded as a negative point. You spoke about metaphysics. The metaphysics is going to matter.
Now, what do you mean by probabilistic tension?
So for example, yeah. For example, for OPI, let's say all contingent things have explanations except for the initial state. So all non-initial things have explanations. And in that sense, you have this category of contingent things where there is one contingent thing that is unlike the others. And you can think of it like, like if I say that, all cats in the world have property X except just one cat. Well, there might be what some philosophers call this internal probabilistic tension, and that's going to be a factor. So it's not like his theory explains everything, but it's not like we just have to ignore an aspect like this and just look at simply the fact that he explains everything. A solipsist would explain everything using his theory versus an external world realist or like a non-solipsist. He explains everything and he's simpler. Well, does that mean that the solipsist has the more reasonable theory? I'm not so sure.
No, but now, so when you said see, here's how I understand probabilistic tension, and just correct me if you're using it differently or not, right? I just understand that if a hypothesis or a theory is going to be a conjunction of some sort, where one conjunct conditioned upon the other conjunct is going to have a probability way less above than one. Do you mean something else or not by probabilistic tension?
Yeah. So you're in the ballpark, yeah.
Right. But see, when we're sort of doing like abductive reasoning, probabilities are not going to be that relevant. What we're interested in is the best explanation. So let's just say that like all our explanations suffer from like a probabilistic tension problem. Um, it might still be the case that we're reasonable to accept the best one, even though it suffers from a probabilistic tension problem.
We accept the best one based on what? Why is it that probabilistic tension, which is just one aspect? Why is it that this doesn't play a role in determining what the best one is?
Oh, but so I would agree that look, it's not the case that like the best explanation is always the rational one to accept. You might have other commitments. For example, I will take it that if the best explanation, let's just say that me and you observe a situation, right? And the only explanation offered is like fairies stole the shoes or something, and there isn't like a competing explanation. So given that it's the only explanation is going to be the best explanation, I'm going to take it that something like our commitment to naturalistic methodological naturalism or something, given its success or something, is going to be sufficient to um, give us reason to reject the best explanation for the phenomenon. Um, so what I'm saying is that unless you have some kind of a stipulated condition in the background or in the foreground that you have an argument for, it's going to be the case that we have reason to accept the best explanation, even if it suffers from like a probabilistic tension, unless you like specify in the background or in the foreground that if there's a probabilistic tension of this and this degree, then the explanation is ought to be rejected.
Yeah, but in that case, it wouldn't. So the whole fairy thing, that wouldn't be the best explanation, based on
No, but best
your.
explanation is going to be a relational term. It just
Yeah,
means
because it's the only explanation. However, you're committed to this principle of methodological naturalism that renders it basically not an explanation at all. So it's not like it's even in. It's not like it's even a candidate for an explanation. So I
no,
don't
it
think
can be
that
an
counts.
explanation. So one way to think about it is to differentiate between potential explanations and sufficient explanations. Um, so potential explanations uh, is merely gonna like satisfy the CS Peirce condition, which is that it entails the explanandum. Um, but nevertheless, you could still specify other conditions, like it can be a just so story, for example. In that case, you could say it's an
Isn't
explanation of
that in
some
your
sort,
background
but
though?
it's not. Yeah, yeah, obviously, or it's like justified in the foreground. But you're just saying, look, even though it's an explanation, it's not the type of explanation that we would accept as a candidate that could like play a part in the calculus of theoretical virtues that we would pick from. But that's going to depend on
No,
your background or your foreground. But well, all I'm saying here is whether or not the thing you brought about probabilistic tension, whether you have something in the background or the foreground, that's going to exclude us from allowing a theory that has probabilistic tension.
Yeah, but that is the issue because if we're gonna compare theories right now, like if we're gonna like you know collectively come together and like sit and look at theories and compare them, then there needs to be like a common ground that we
I
use
agree.
in order to compare theories. And now if we're gonna disagree and you're gonna tell me something like it can't be a just so story, which like I don't know how you're gonna have any metaphysical theory. That's just throwing metaphysics out the window. It's fine for you to do that, but that's coming from your background. It's not in my background, so we can't even compare theories right now.
Well, I'm going to say this, but this is like relevant to discussion. But I think like most metaphysics should be like just like gibberish or just so stories and not substantial. But so like I wouldn't be like I wouldn't like deny that most of metaphysics is just so stories. Um, but I'm gonna say this, that I agree with you that if me unless me and you have like a sufficient agreement in the background, we couldn't engage in like rational inquiry together. But in that case, there would be like no point in us arguing. When I'm saying something like you can justify the PSR, I'm just saying that given that we agree, or at least you hold the type of paradigm that like the scientific community would hold, or the paradigm that the analytic philosophy community holds to, or overlaps with them to a sufficient degree, you're not going to be able to like give an inference to the PSR. That's my contention. But I don't think you disagree with
Well,
that.
at least we agree on that, right? So I think we agree on that. That it's going to be
no, that's
pointless unless we
a
do
quick
agree
question. Saying,
on a method.
Let
Yeah,
me let
yeah.
me.
How you can go ahead because I'm going to mute. But then let me just one last thing. I'm
Is
saying well
this
that
guy
in
your friend? Because if so, I can
he's
let
cool.
him
He's cool.
speak.
He's
Okay,
cool.
go
Yeah,
ahead.
Hatim's cool. So, but
yeah,
so just one
yeah.
last thing before
So
Hatim
it
goes,
was
because
just
I'm gonna
me.
mute. I'm gonna mute Hatim
Okay.
because my kid is just like I need to put him to sleep. But then just one last thing. I'm saying that in this sense, it wouldn't be very useful comparing theories. I think just like the sort of internal critique style is more useful in the sense that I can just ask you about your beliefs, and if at least like internal consistency is something that you accept, then you could try to see whether a person is consistent with his own principles. So I guess yeah, I'm
No,
gonna
no,
have
I
to mute
agree. I
because
agree.
my kid is awake.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, sorry. Yeah, so go ahead, Hatim guy. What were you gonna say?
Yeah. So like, would you say like lack of like arbitrariness or like ad hocness is a theoretical virtue? Um.
Well, what do you mean by ad hocness?
So I mean, like when like there's no like consistent like criteria as to when something uh I don't know is a certain way or not.
Yeah, I don't see how that's the way I define ad hocness is that you provide an initial assumption to a falsified theory in order to save it from the falsification. That's how I understand ad hocness. But what it
Okay.
seems like
So
you're
how about
saying
like
is you're
lack of
saying that
arbitrariness?
yeah, but that's just to say that like lack of principles to govern something. But I don't see how more
Yeah.
principle is going to be
Exactly.
a virtue. Yeah, I don't see how that's going to be a virtue.
Okay. Yeah. So that was just my question because um I mean I guess like it's gonna get into like a discussion as to like which theoretical virtues we should hold or not. But I don't see how like if like it's not a virtue to hold principles, then I mean then you can just say okay, yeah, like you just be ad hoc or sorry like arbitrary, and that's fine. I'm like with everything, I
But
don't
I
see
don't
how
think.
that makes any sense.
Well, I don't think they're ad hoc. See, somebody could just add like a principle that everything that you should believe exists should be green, right? Like we will agree that there'd be like a principle we wouldn't accept. We wouldn't say like a theory is more virtuous if it has that principle and everything else that another theory has, right? So let's just imagine you have two theories, right? But one theory accepts everything the other theory accepts. The only difference is that it also accepts that everything that exists has to be green. Would you take that theory to be more virtuous?
No, I wouldn't think that's the only reason, but I mean, unless like there is some virtue to having principles at all, then like the opposite would be like no different. So you could just be like completely inconsistent with, I don't know, any beliefs you have.
But I'm trying to track your intuition here, right? So what I'm asking you
Yeah,
is,
so
two
here's what I'm saying
theories
basically.
are the
So
same except for with respect to one thing. That is, one of the theories also accepts the principle that everything that exists has to be green. Would you say that theory is more theoretically virtuous than the other theory?
no, no, no,
Then
no.
you don't think, then you don't accept
I
the
wouldn't say that
virtue
one.
that, then you don't accept the principle that you stated that the more principles, the more virtuous.
No, no, I didn't say the I don't know if I said like the more principles, but I said like lack of arbitrariness.
Yeah, but look, somebody could just say that the non-green theory has more arbitrariness than the other one because it has less principle. Or else, how do you cash out the arbitrariness other than lack of principles or less principles?
Oh, what do you mean? It's
Oh,
like a
because what else does arbitrariness means other than choice in the absence of a principle?
yeah, okay, let's go back to like what you were saying about explanations, how like you expect for some things to like to remain unexplained, which is fine. I think that's something we can agree on. But like you would surely like you would find um I don't know, like there being an explanation would be like more preferable than like there not being. So that's not necessarily a principle, but um well actually like that would be a principle,
So that's going to be
but
a
I guess the idea of
counterexample to the
having
thing.
I'm
So you
sorry,
agree that's
what?
a counter. So you would agree that the example I just gave is a counterexample to the thing you stated initially.
Initially what I said was like lack of arbitrariness being a virtue.
Yeah, but
No, no,
how?
I think you would agree with that because otherwise then we could just I mean then like there wouldn't be a virtue to like something being explained as opposed to not because we could just accept the arbitrariness of like there
Oh,
not being an
but then you
explanation.
just, oh, so okay, I see. But then you're just asking me if I take explanatory scope to be an explanatory virtue, but I do, yeah. I said that from the get-go. The more things that are explained, the better. But that's different from saying the more principles, the better. Because I could have less principles but explain more.
Yeah,
Yeah, but if there's no so
the
like that
less.
would assume that those principles are like sufficient to let's say hmm yeah, hold on, let me think on that.
So
I'll get
so
back to
Yeah, I
you.
think
so
Abdurrahim
wouldn't
wanted to make a comment. Go ahead, Abdurrahim.
yeah, wouldn't it be the case that, like, okay, so the less commitments you have in the background, the better, probably, right? Like if you
No,
could
I wouldn't
do
agree with
what
that.
why? I thought
Oh,
you'd
because I
agree
don't
with
think
that.
that to be a theoretical virtues. Because here's how I cash out simplicity, right? Well, the way I cash out simplicity in terms of agreeing on the same set of of propositions, but I affirm more propositions. So, for example, let me give you an example. Let's say I have an opaque box in front of you, and Hatim ibn Ali says there's a cat in the box, but Abdul Rashid says there's a black cat in the box with blue eyes and um, you know white tail. Which of those do you think is more probable, Hatim's claim or Abdul Rashid's claim?
Yeah, I think. Yeah,
Right. So that's the way I understand simplicity, just that it makes the same claims but additional claims on top of that.
yeah, but I'm
So I
not
think,
talking about simplicity. I'm talking about background knowledge. So I mean, you like so so let's say all things are green. I think that was the principle you mentioned. I mean, holding to an unnecessary principle in the background. I mean, that's
well,
clearly
what makes it unnecessary? In virtue of what is it unnecessary?
okay. But then, so then now I'm confused.
See,
So
when you
you're
say it's
yeah,
unnecessary, you're assuming that there is some kind of a rationality between deciding between the things in the background.
Yeah, you actually that is a good point, but then it just makes it completely, as Hatton put it, it is just completely arbitrary right now in the sense that
Well, it is
Yeah,
arbitrary.
yeah.
So,
Because
see,
in some
Abdul
sense,
Rahman. Wait, let me just say this, and I'll let you speak as much as you want to. Before, like in the beginning of the conversation, did I say that the conventions, under my view, my personal view, are going to be conventions or not?
yeah, but I'm remembering what Abdul
Right.
Rashid said, who's basically a dog, Mr. House, which was had some sense to it, which was the idea that like you should hold to the principles that you need in order to have knowledge, or maybe for like a specific purpose regarding what theory you're trying to explain, or what theory you think, or what
But
data you
how is
think you
that not
can
arbitrary,
explain.
though? How's that not arbitrary?
I'm not saying it's not arbitrary. I'm saying it's necessary with regard to a specific goal.
Right, I agree, but the goal is going to be arbitrary, right?
Oh well, yeah, obviously, yeah.
Probably. I mean, something is going to be arbitrary, right?
Right.
But
So no, but
yeah.
see, if we as a see, even in conventionalism, right, we as a scientific community can have certain goals, and then we can have, like, given those goals, and we agree on some logic, we can have some progress in terms of what's going to be most efficient or efficacious towards that goal, and we can pick amongst those principles that is going to be most efficacious. But there's still going to be arbitrariness in that regard.
yeah, okay, okay. So, but maybe we need to be a bit more careful with what exactly is arbitrary here. So, like, let's say because we were talking about intuition earlier and how it might relate to
Yeah,
something like the PSR.
but remember what I said, right? I said what I'm interested in is whether or not you have an influence in the foreground or not. Because once you shift the debate to the background, I'm just going to take that to be like not a, I'm
Well,
going to take that to be like an irrational discussion, because rationality is
well,
going to just be
I
defined by what you.
remember.
Sorry.
I remember like what I wanted to say about this. So like
Okay.
you could have in the background that like a PSR is required,
hmm
but in the foreground like debate like which of the available PSRs is the best one. I mean, I don't see a
Yeah.
problem
Even if
with
we
that
grant that,
particular.
I just wouldn't hold in the background that there's like a PSR, but then the discussion is just going to be uninteresting because I can hold like in the background that atheism is true, but then I'm just going to spin in the foreground how to like understand atheism.
Yeah, but okay. So I think the so back to the whole arbitrariness thing, right? So with regard to explanation, um, so there's clearly going to be a difference with regard to like whether, so if we're talking about intuition, for example, whether it is a commonly held intuition, or an intuition that unicorns exist, like intuitions about like maybe axioms of logic or principles of explanation or knowledge, or like
But
external
But
world
I just wanted
realism.
to
even if it's
ask.
Like,
held, even if it's commonly held, right? As long as I don't take intuitions to be justified, it doesn't matter if like 99.99 of the population is holding. That wouldn't be a justifier in my paradigm.
is your so would your not taking of intuitions to be justified be something in the background?
No, I would just take it that there is no successful argument in the foreground for why intuitions are justified.
But the but then whatever is in your background, right? It would kind of have to relate in one way or another to your intuition. So wouldn't that be a bit of an
It would have to
inconsistency?
relate to everything that I take in the foreground in some sense, yeah.
So, but then how can you have something in your background that is significantly undermined in the foreground?
No, but what is in the background can be undermined. What is in the foreground can't undermine what's in the background.
Wait, what's the difference
So
between hinges and a foundation? I just want.
probably same thing. So
No, it's not that. No, it's not the
it's
same
not the
thing
same. It's not
because
the same. Yeah, yeah.
foundationalists. I'll explain the difference. Foundationalists wants to take what is as a foundation and what's like properly basic to be epistemically justified, whereas what's in hinge isn't epistemically justified. In fact, it would be a category error to say it's epistemically justified. Rather, the hinge is what defines what is justified and unjustified.
So can you give me an example of something in your background?
Classical logic
Classical logic. So obviously,
or the Peano
you
axioms.
yeah, but so if I ask why you hold to it, some
Well,
obviously
because
if you
that's
want
the
to not explain,
convention that.
yeah, but why is
So
it why is it that convention? So the idea that It's a conventional thing, and that's how you determine what's in the background, or that's how, why do you go by that principle?
Oh, I see what you mean. So what you're asking is, why do I hold to conventionalism as some other view?
Mhm.
But you realize in that case you're asking me a psychological question. I don't mind answering it. I just
Yeah,
wanna
but that's going to take us back to
right.
intuition, though, isn't it?
Yeah. So the thing is, I think debates, because once you understand that justification is going to be cashed out as inferential, and then you understand that you can't have an inferential in the absence of a logic, you understand that there can't be a rational dispute between the logics. Uh, so in that case, how do you decide between the logics? Um,
But then this is going to be
but you're
inferential
gonna
then,
need
so it doesn't
more.
really.
But you're gonna need more. Sorry, you're gonna need more than merely logic to have sort of like semantics in your type of beliefs, or even the type of beliefs that science presupposes, right? That we can have like scientific theories and other things. Um, and in that sense, there doesn't seem any more plausible candidate other than like social candidates that is mere like a convention, because any other candidate is gonna like conflate the background with the foreground. It's sort of gonna make claims that the background can be justified, and that's gonna end up
But
with
it
like
but it seems
problems.
like you're justifying conventionalism, which puts it in the foreground. But then you put the laws of logic in the background, and the reason you hold to them is conventionalism. So it just looks like you're in a bit of a circle here.
Oh, I'm not. Oh no, no. But I didn't say what I just said now is an epistemic justified. I'm
Well,
just saying that we can examine. So here's another way to put it, right? Um, Once these things are made clear to us, the things that I just mentioned, we can examine. Hey, we seem to be like in a loop here. But what do we just mean when we say this thing is like justified? Like when you say this thing is justified, what do you mean? Um, and once you examine that, at least for me, it doesn't seem to me that I mean anything other than it is in accordance with what I hold in the background.
yeah,
It's
but
not
if
going to
we're
be
gonna,
immediately accessible to me, but I'm going to like go through the step of, for example, um, it seems to me that a justification is when I can show something is more likely than not. But then what is likelihood? Well, likelihood is probability. Wait, somebody's speaking. Sorry, I'm just gonna mute you, Jack, by the way, because you had like mad noise. Um, so let me repeat that. For example, I'm not providing you with an epistemic justification for conventionalism. What I'm saying is something akin to this. I'm just gonna ask, what do I mean by justification or knowledge? Because knowledge, I'm gonna say justified true belief. What do I mean by justified? Um, uh, it just seems to me I mean something like more likely than not. But what is likelihood? Well, that's gonna be like a probability thing. What is probability absence of a mathematics? Doesn't make sense. What is a mathematics absence of a logic? That doesn't make any sense to me. Um, and at this point, I've gotten to the point where logic is prior to justification. But if logic is prior to justification, how can you have justification of one logic over the other?
yeah,
So it just seems like the
but then,
logic
yeah,
has to be
I see that,
given before you can
yeah,
have justification, right?
I see that, but it seems like what you're doing here with like psychoanalyzing your own epistemology is that you're basically, you know, un, unraveling the truths of your intuitions that, you know, your foreground undermines. Because what if this this is an intellectual seeming for you, that it seems like this must be the case. Well, if it seems like this must be the case, then
Okay, I see what you mean.
yeah,
Yeah, but see, the thing is, what was the initial thing that I said? I said, what is justification? And that led me to a step where I ended up taking logic to be prior to justification. So that means that through these steps, I'm just going to conclude that logic couldn't be something that could be justified or unjustified by intuition. So,
yeah. But when I asked you why you hold to the laws of logic, you appeal to convention, and then right now convention is going to be basically something that is based on these several intellectual seemings, and at the same time in the foreground, down the road, the idea of intellectual seemings being an epistemic base is something that is undermined by your own principles.
no, no, because there's going to be a difference between what I mean by a term and whether I take something to justify. Because what I mean by a term, when we're carrying out conceptual analysis, what we're going to appeal to is intuitions, because I'm just going to figure out what do I mean by this concept. But in terms of justification, I'm asking in terms of what is this term epistemically justified. So in the one case, I'm just trying to figure out what do I mean by justification. In the other case, I'm trying to figure out whether or not there's reasons to think thing is true. So in the first case, once I figure out what I mean by justification, I figure out I mean an inference. And once I figure out what I mean by an inference, I figure out that I'll take a logic to be a logic and a math and so on to be steady, and I'm just comparing one proposition to the other, in accordance with these things in the background or not. And then I
Yeah, but
just take the step.
but you're just appealing to the way you feel about these things. So you're analyzing the way you feel about these things.
Oh no, I'm analyzing what I mean by these things, not
Yeah,
how I feel about
but
these
what
things.
you mean is by these things is basically the rock bottom, right? I mean, just there's no going, there are no deeper layers to that, in the sense that you just mean something because that it seems to be the case to you. It's not. It's well, I mean, what else
Yeah,
are
but
you
when I
going to do?
say, so for example, let me give you an example. If I say by like ought, I mean something that implies a can, and you say otherwise, I'm not saying I've given you an inference or a justification that ought implies can. I'm just saying that in that case, we're just going to have a different conceptual analysis. Not that you're going to be rational if you don't take ought that ought implies can.
Yeah, but I'm not. Yeah, so I'm not saying this needs.
So
I'm
when I
not saying. Yeah,
right, so the
I'm not saying
distinction
that
is
your
going to be
position. Okay, go
so the
ahead.
distinction is going to be this, right? In the terms of the epistemic justifier part, I would hold that you're irrational, but in the case of the conceptual analysis part, I'm not going to hold that you're irrational or something. I'm just going to hold that we have a different conceptual analysis of the very concept.
Yeah, but right now I'm not comparing our different, conceptualizations of knowledge and justification. Right now
Okay.
I'm just looking at the internal consistency of your view, which has at its, very core an appeal to intuition slash intellectual seeming, which is the same thing. And at the foreground, again, you come and you undermine that very principle that your epistemology is founded upon. I don't think you can appeal
Well,
to
but
anything.
how?
Yeah.
But I can't undermine it because what is rejected is that intuitions are epistemic justifiers. But to say that like by my analysis, so by my intuition, this term means this, I'm not appealing to some epistemic justifier.
But I wasn't appealing to them as epistemic justifiers. I was saying that the idea that an intuition kind of like grounds or drives the sort of like building blocks of the background is something that is quite obvious, and surely an appeal to a commonly held intuition, especially you being a conventionalist, is something that should be regarded as more plausible or more, more stable than the idea that
Oh no, oh no, I would like, disagree because what I would just say then is that you just so for example, what you're saying is something like this, right? Let's say that the folk notion of the concept of art is that it implies can. In that case, it's more reasonable to say that art implies can than not. But I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to say when I say art, I'm talking about the folk notion. So if you're talking about an art that doesn't imply a can, then you're just going to be equivocating with me, and you're going to be talking about something else. But I'm not going to say that I'm like more rational or something. I'm just going to be saying that we're talking about two different things. But how I analyze what a concept means or not is an appeal to intuitions. But that's different from saying that intuitions are epistemic justifiers.
yeah, but
One is semantical,
you
the
could
other
say
is
that.
relating. One
Yeah,
is
yeah,
semantical, the other is epistemic.
yeah, but for you personally, right? Your intuition, it is your driving force, or is a significant driving force behind the your the background that you have, and for you personally,
For
and
conceptual
for
analysis or epistemic justification?
yeah, for conceptual analysis,
Right.
that's what I'm saying.
Well, intuitions are going to be one part. I'm not going to exclude like maybe like philosophical, feel like philosophical experiments or something like,
For the
sorry,
background.
experimental philosophy or something where we're just going to look at what like most people means by some terms or something to like be relevant to how we carry out conceptual analysis.
Okay, but in that sense, wouldn't your intuitions about explanations be, relevant to your background, not your epistemic justification?
They would be relevant to what I mean by terms, not to justifications.
So okay, so your intuitions about, your intuitions that lead to, the foundations that you have in your background about logical axioms, right? Your intuitions are significant here in terms of the conceptual analysis, right? And in terms of your intuitions about explanation, why doesn't that place the your very idea of explanation as per your intuitions in the same place in the background? Like, what's the difference? Why choose one over the other when it's simply about a conceptual analysis that is intuitive?
Right, because I'm open to the case that like intuitions might inform what is going to be in the background as opposed to the foreground. But remember what I said earlier, that the things in the background are not going to be things that are epistemically justified or unjustified. That would be a category error. So even if intuitions inform what is in the background, that's not going to make intuitions as epistemic justifiers.
I don't think they're no. So I'm not saying they're epistemic justifiers. I'm saying if they determine or largely determine what is in the background, and you have a specific intuition about
Mm-hmm.
a specific topic, then that should be in the background. Especially if it's like something that is, somewhat foundational epistemically.
Well, I don't
Why
want you
pick
to
and
use the
choose?
word foundational
Yeah.
because,
Sorry. Okay.
but yeah, no, I'm
Crucial.
not picking. I'm not picking. Look, I'm just saying that like intuitions might inform what is in the background, but again, what's in the background, we're not gonna apply justification or unjustification to it. What I'm saying is that in the foreground, provided you don't have something in the background like intuitions or justifiers or something, then you couldn't appeal to justifiers in the absence of an argument for why intuitions are justifiers. That's the initial claim that I made. Now, that intuitions play a part in what goes in the background is consistent with that claim, right? So there's like no inconsistency with the initial claim that I made and the claim that I'm making now.
No. Yeah. So I'm not saying there's
But
inconsistency with
I'm assuming,
justification.
what you're saying is that what if somebody has this is what I'm assuming where you want to take the discussion, right? What if somebody has like some kind of an intuition similar to the one you have about conventionalism or some other things where you appeal to intuition to like
Explanation.
build the
Make an
background.
explanation so it can be related to the
No, I
background.
don't want to say explanations because explanations are going to be determined by what you have in the background because explanations are going to be inferential. But I'm assuming you're saying something like this. Look, you appeal to your intuition by building your background. What if somebody else, in virtue of their intuitions, put the PSR in the background? What then? Did I understand your? Is that where you want to go?
Exactly. Yes.
Right. So what I would say in that case is that it wouldn't be possible for us to have an argument or like a dispute about the PSR just because they have a different background than I have than mine. The only way we can dispute is that if our paradigms are commensurable to the extent that we can take something in the foreground and we have sufficient things in the background to let us adjudicate whether the thing in the foreground is justified or not.
No, that's fine. I'm not saying. I'm not concerned with dispute here. I'm just concerned with consistency. If a certain PSR or a certain conceptualization of the principle of explanation is not anywhere within your intuition, that's fine. That's okay. But it is a very common intuition. So I think in terms of what's
Wait,
in
when
the
you say it's a
background,
common intuition, where's the do you have like a study to show that?
yes, I mean, I don't have a study on my hands right now, but I mean, I even very briefly discussed this with Malpass online and offline privately, and he generally agrees that
Yeah, but Malpass is one
you,
person. You said generally. What's
yeah,
the evidence
yes,
that it's generally regarded so?
but he's a philosopher that I think you would of course
No,
you would.
I'm
I'm
friends.
just
I'm
saying.
friends with Malpass. I know
Yeah.
Malpass,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. I'm just saying.
But
I'm,
he's
I'm
one
just saying.
person, right?
Yeah. He might be wrong, and I might be wrong. So obviously this is not this like not. I'm not trying to do an
No, but you
appeal to
made an
authority. I'm just
empirical
saying.
claim, right? You said generally
Yeah.
it's regarded.
That's
So
right. That's right.
what's
So
the
for now,
empirical study for that?
okay. So for now, let me retract that and say if, right, because I don't have the evidence,
Oh,
although I've
okay, that's
come
fine.
across it and I can bring it. So let's say I say if if it is the case that certain intuitions about explanation and certain intuitions about principles of sufficient reason are widespread, then it seems like uh, 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 one PSR or another is going to be in the background of most people, even if implicitly, and you find we can't engage in like some kind of conceptual analysis that compares your theories with ours because you just have a different background. I mean, you can have a background that all Coke cans are frogs, and Yeah, I can't convince you otherwise. But the thing is, with regard to the common intuition, I think you would just be in the minority, and that principle of sufficient reason would be very commonly in the background, which I think lends some kind of credence to it.
No, but credence is going to be determined what you have in the background. When you say it lends some kind of credence, either you're just talking about
Conventionally.
what you have. No, I don't think so, because, well, see, the interesting thing is, if you recall, when I talked about conventions, I talked about the convention of the scientific community, not the lay community.
But that's very specific. So that's in your background, convention about specific scientific, not lay communities.
Yeah, that's correct. Because I take that like the sciences to be like paradigm cases of how theory choice ought to be done, and that's gonna
Well,
be.
isn't that a question of like philosophy of science? Not exactly, not hard
I
science.
don't make a distinction between philosophy and science.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. So, okay.
I think those should be continuous.
So it in your background is conventionalism, that is in line with expert opinion, basically.
With the convention, with the community that does engage in theory choice. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, then I guess
But that's just gonna be,
is
for
interesting, because
example,
I don't think
and for
there's a
that reason.
consensus of any of this stuff. I mean, yeah, there is.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that, I don't think by studying just like how physics is done or something, you can like derive what the theoretical virtues are. So I think at that point that's going to be like speculative. I don't deny that. But unless me and you unless we have like a sufficient overlap on our speculations or something, I think like engaging in theory choice or something is going to be useless, because we're just going to have different epistemologies. And what's the point of like um, engaging in theory choice if we have like completely different
Yeah, but I'm
epistemologies?
wondering. I don't know what your H. Do I call you HT?
Just call me the name I have now.
What is it? Sorry, I forgot.
Just call me Saint,
Saint.
or Saint.
Saint. Okay, Saint. What's it called? Because can anybody be wrong? Right. So, like, if
Yeah, but
I can
wrongness is
be,
determined by the background.
but exactly, but look, so if I'm inconsistent,
Hmm.
I'm only wrong if in my background
That's
inconsistency is
correct.
wrong.
That's correct.
But
Yeah.
if in my background inconsistency is wrong, then I'm just not going to be inconsistent. I mean,
No,
it's
but
just
what if what you have in the background is like power consistency, and you have like dialtism in the background, and even if you like affirm a contradiction, that's not going to be a problem given your paradigm.
But that's my point. What I'm saying is, if I do affirm classical logic in the background, then I'm
Hmm.
simply just it's almost
You're
as
just
if
going to be
you can't be
incommensurable
wrong.
with the dialtist. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is,
But
um,
what's the problem with that?
because I think that's just going to be like that principle you're referring to has to be in the background, and then you're kind of generalizing it on all backgrounds, in the sense that you're
No, I'm not
saying,
generalizing it. I'm saying that you and the dialtist are just going to be incommensurable with respect to this one proposition that he takes to be a dialthea.
no, okay, look, let's assume I affirm classical logic, right?
Hmm.
And I
But he
have an
doesn't.
inconsistency, and I have no, forget about him, me. I have an
Hmm.
inconsistency in my belief. Then I'm
Hmm.
wrong, right? Because in my background knowledge, I can't be inconsistent, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But why?
Well, because given your background hinges, it's just going to stipulate that you're wrong.
But aren't you just right now appealing to like a generalized principle that I have to be consistent with my background beliefs?
No, but if consistency is what determines rightness and wrongness in your background, then it's just going to follow analytically from what you have in the background. I'm not stipulating something outside of your background.
Yeah, yes, but what you're basically what you're saying here is that consistency is a theoretical virtue.
Within my background, yeah. What I'm saying is that
Yes, but you're
relative to
saying,
your background, you're going to be wrong. Not that you're like wrong simplicity.
yeah, but okay, so that's I guess that's the issue, because for you, like someone who doesn't affirm classical logic, he will throw this whole thing out the window. Right? It's like this doesn't.
I mean, I do. I'm just saying that if somebody doesn't, I wouldn't have a conversation with that person, because I would just take that like rational inquiry with that person would be incommensurable. Because even if I was to run like a reductio ad absurdum to that person, he could just say, "So what? Then what?"
Yeah. So, the implications of your view is that, okay, and this is something Malpass used in our discussion, is that the belief that hamburgers eat people, that belief is just that can be correct.
No, but I've had this look. Malpass doesn't agree with my view. I've had this conversation with Malpass.
No, sorry, I only mentioned him.
Actually, Malpass does take intuitions to be just fair. I just think Malpass is wrong. I've had this very conversation with Malpass. I'm not talking about
his position. Sorry for mentioning him. I was just remembering that he said that funny line, hamburgers eating people. So I'm saying that. So the implication of what you're saying is that, well, in order to determine whether the proposition hamburgers eat people is reasonable to hold to or not, I have to look at this person's background beliefs.
That's correct, yeah.
No, okay, that's fine. But
in fact, you wouldn't even know what wrong means without looking at his background, because his background is going to include even the semantics.
No, I think that's something that, this is a claim I'm making, by the way. I'm just pulling it out of the hat, so don't ask me for a reference. I think that 99.9999% of humanity would find what you're saying absurd.
Yeah, but so would they with like error theory and other views that I hold. Like that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, but so it's the collective background of humanity.
Look, I think look. I think like I think appealing to like the folk notions are going to be interesting in terms of like semantics. Like, what do we mean by a term? But whether like a view is like plausible or not, I just think like the common population is going to be interesting, because you could just do that with like quantum mechanics, or just like in things with sciences, and like a lot of those things, most of populations are just going to affirm something that's like inconsistent with what like the best theories affirm.
Yeah, but with quantum mechanics, it's probably going to be because of their lack of understanding of like the evidence and everything.
And this is because of the lack of understanding of epistemology and what inferences are and what like
but what you're
logic is and so on.
Clear. What you're saying now is very clear. It is. So what it
I don't think so.
What it implies is truly a radical kind of relativism where. So that's fine, by the way. It's okay if you're fine with it. What I'm saying is there are no deeper layers there. It's like they can be familiar with those other stuff. I mean, these other
I understand. Look, what I'm saying is that I don't deny I hold to some kind of epistemic relativism, right? I don't deny that, right? In fact, I think it's like silly if you're not an epistemic relativist in some sense. But what I'm saying is that the common person who doesn't know that the analysis of knowledge is justified through belief, who hasn't like read this literature, who doesn't see like these deductions and these inferences, who doesn't understand the notion of foreground and background, probably with them they're gonna have like the type of intuitions that are like correspondence theory,
but I think these
metaphysical realism, infallibilism about knowledge and so on. But that's not gonna be interesting. So what?
But the complexities of these issues, brother, they only surface when you try to philosophically analyze.
Yeah, but that's the same thing with quantum mechanics. These issues are only once you apply the physics and you have an understanding of the physics.
No, but what I was going to say the opposite of that. So I was going to say, as opposed to quantum mechanics, most of the things you just listed right now are intuitively accessible, although not linguistically expressible, right? But the quantum mechanics is a different story. But then you said you think it's silly not to be an epistemic relativist of some sort. But isn't that going to depend on my background knowledge?
Well, to say that like anything is silly is going to depend on your background knowledge. I'm just saying that
exactly.
given the convention I'm part of, that's going to be silly.
Yeah, but then given the convention you're part of, if I'm not a relativist about knowledge, or if I'm not an epistemic relativist, then that's kind of like what that implies is that there seems to be somewhat of a defeater, or at least like the introductions to a defeater here, because it would be true for me that relativism is false, and I don't know, there's something there.
Wait, but let's just before we get to that, I just want to make clear, because I don't think there's like a symmetry breaker between QM or even just like psychology or even like the other broader sciences, because I think there's gonna be like a lot of things there that are like that are like counterintuitive. Which like if you were just to survey most people's intuition, it's gonna be out of accord with what they believe. For example, um, the idea that like most trained nurses or most trained chess players don't like reason about their moves or something. If you just like ask most people what do you think chess players do, they're probably gonna say they reason or something. I don't even have to appeal to like quantum mechanics, but I'm just gonna take it to explain what's the gap between the positions of the quantum physicists and the lay people to be a lack of knowledge. But that's I'm just gonna take that to be the difference between epistemologists who tend to be infallibilists or whatever, and like the common folk to merely be like knowledge as well. So I don't see like a
But I wasn't claiming
relevant
that intuition
distinction.
is infallible and that people's intuitions can't be mistaken. And I also wasn't claiming that everybody's intuitions would be in line with what I'm
No, but you
saying
said
here.
most people's though.
Yeah, I was saying that for
I'm just saying
most
what
people,
explains
these
most
things
in
are.
most cases is going to be the same thing.
Sorry, sorry, maybe
What I'm
under
saying is what I'm saying is that if I mean you don't have any studies, I assume, but let me just grant you the empirical claims you made. What I said is that
No, I specifically said that. I'm just pulling that out of the
yeah,
hat.
yeah,
You
no,
know,
no, no,
yeah,
no. That's what I'm saying. I'm just granting it, right? What I'm saying is the
yeah.
following, right? If we grant you their empirical claims, what I'm saying is that there's going to be a gap in the quantum mechanics part, as well as like other fields of science, and there's going to be a gap between like what epistemologists hold, or what like meta-ethicists hold, and what like the common folk hold. And I'm saying that like the same thing that explains one explains the other. It's just going to be lack of knowledge or lack of expertise.
So can you give me an example of something on the epistemology side before I answer? Something on the epistemology side that is going to be out of access for the
Sure, sure,
layperson.
sure, 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 sure,
Yeah,
sure. So for example, are you familiar with like Mackey's argument from queerness?
yeah.
Right. So like most people, if I was to ask your grandma, she wouldn't take it that let's just assume that like Mackey's analysis at the very least of like the good
Yeah, but I agree with that
is
because right now you're talking about
right, right.
moral
No, no,
epistemology.
no.
So
So
let's,
that if I ask, for example, your grandmother or something, she probably would know like the goodness entails something like objectivity, um, external motivation, um, what else?
yeah, but let's not talk about moral
Categoricity,
knowledge.
categoricity, and so on, which is the very thing that the argument appeals to render these things impossible, right? But it's only that once you know that like goodness entails these things that you're able to see that like the goodness can't be something that exists. Likewise, in quantum mechanics, if we ask the same person, they wouldn't be able to like understand that like there's like quantum entanglement and all these other things. So what's like common in both cases is just going to be like an ignorance of either like the entailment or like the in what relations these stand on or something. And so I would just take it that the reason why most people are not like error theorists or something is because they're like ignorant of the information.
Yeah,
Just
but
like in the
same
terms of
with
quantum
regard to
mechanics.
moral knowledge, I would agree. So right now, so let's make it more related to what we were talking about. You know, that relates to epistemic relativism and the foundations of knowledge and stuff like that. So what I'm saying is those aspects, right, um, that influence what the expert opinions about these topics of like background knowledge and axioms and stuff like that.
Mhm.
What are the aspects that the layperson wouldn't have access to that
Oh,
influences
just the
those things we're talking about?
or just like the arguments for and against and so on, the literature and the debates on what like accounts for like justification and so on, and like the debates around like what is the structure of justification and so on.
But that's not gonna. So like for example, let's so non-inferential, background knowledge, right? So the idea that of like let's say a properly based belief or intuition or
Hmm.
something that's something that's people generally have access to. The
No, but like
obviousness of certain.
how many people know like the critique of like sellers of the myth of the given?
But what I'm saying is they don't need to in order to come up with, in order to have intuitive access that they can't necessarily express to certain concepts that would enable them to have some kind of rational access to assessing your views on epistemology here. I mean, there's not, It's not similar to like superposition in quantum mechanics and all the complicated mathematical theorems that come with it. It's just it's on a different level.
Oh, well, I think what's going to come down to is that if you assume some kind of like empiricism as opposed to like rationalism, it's just going to be like in one case, what the difference is going to be an input of synthetic propositions, whereas in the other, there is no input of synthetic propositions. But I could just point out, look, okay, fine. Then what's going to explain it in one case is just going to be that people either are just going to have like radically different intuitions, or they're going to have intuitions such that they're just not aware of what the entailments of their intuitions are. And these type of arguments are just going to show them that given their intuitions and their understandings and their beliefs, they should reject this belief that they thought was plausible prior to hearing the argument.
But how? So if intuitions largely determine what's in the background, then how can the entailments of some of these
Oh, because
intuitions?
people aren't like calculators; they're not like perfect, like they can't like perfectly carry out entailments.
But
A lot of time,
that's not the point. The point is that your argument right now, as a conventionalist who's appealing to internal consistency, for you to look at their intuitions and tell them, hey, they entail these absurdities. Well, whether or not they're absurdities are going to largely depend on these people's intuitions.
I agree.
Background knowledge.
What I'm saying is that even though they're absurdities given their backgrounds, they'll not necessarily be aware that they're absurdities given their background. And that's what these arguments are going to show.
But I'm telling you, they're not absurdities given their background, because you're talking about the implications of their intuitions, which determine their background.
Yeah, but now you're just talking about people who would have like such radical intuition, radically different intuitions to mind that they wouldn't like have the same, they wouldn't even like have the same things in their background. In that case, it would just be incommensurable, and rational inquiry wouldn't be possible.
But yeah, so now intuition matters, and I don't remember what your answer was. Yes, your answer with regard to intuition about PSR was, your background basically appealing to expert opinion, which I found a bit, by the way, strange, because and never mind, because you see, if it's in your background that you have to appeal to expert opinion, then I'm sorry, I lost it.
Well, it's not. See, the thing is, like, I take it that you're sort of like given in the world where there's things that like rational as opposed to like irrational and so on are gonna be like informed by your community and other things, and there's gonna be like a hierarchy of those things where like the scientific community gonna start like the largest and so on. So in that, for example, if you were like born in like the 15th century or something, prior to like Newton or something, and you like engage in these topics, you educate yourself in like philosophy of science and epistemology of the days and so on, you're gonna end up holding that like, unless you're like radically different from the community of the days, you're gonna hold like explanations are gonna be like mechanistic and so on. And so if somebody just gave you like a mechanistic explanation, you're gonna say like, look, hey, um, explanations are mechanical, and this is not like a mechanical explanation, so it's not like explanations at all. And the same thing is gonna be today. Like maybe in like some future community or something, it's going to be the case of like simplicity or depth or something, not even like theoretical virtues and so on. And so had we born then, we would like have a radically different background than we do now. So that's what the thing I was talking about, like with the background thing. But if I just meet somebody, for example, who says, hey, it's just like background of my community that God exists, right? But I share everything else that you share in your background. I'm gonna still be able to like argue about that with that guy about like everything else. It's just gonna be that like the God discussion is gonna be impossible because he holds that thing in the background. So what I'm saying is that rational inquiries are just gonna be possible if what's in the background is commensurable or not, or overlaps to a sufficient degree to allow the discussion. Now, are you saying that there's like a problem with that view or not?
Of course, I see a problem with the relativism that's implied.
Right.
I just
So when you're
just kind
saying
of
there's a problem with the relativism, then you're saying that there's a way to show that it's like rational or irrational to hold something in the background. But what would that be?
there's a way to show that it's what?
Right. So if you're rejecting the relativism here, what you're saying is that what determines whether something is rational or irrational, or justified or unjustified or something, is not merely going to be what logic and mathematics and so on you have in the background, right? If that's the case, what do you think like determines what is rational or irrational, that is objective? or at least not
I
agent
mean,
relative.
so you don't think that something in the background can be irrational? Am I right? I'm kind of shedding
Now the background is what
my
determines what
entire.
is rational or not. So that's going to be a
Yeah,
category error.
exactly. So wait. So someone determine again in someone's background. Hamburgers eat humans. The rationality or lack thereof of that is going to be depend on background knowledge, and we can't just here come together and collectively agree that regardless of whatever philosophical mumbo jumbo we can engage in, this person is irrational or this piece of background knowledge is irrational. You don't agree with that, right?
Yeah, I think you're only going to be able to engage in the rational inquiry, where you would agree whether or not one person in the debate is being rational or rational, is if you have like a sufficient overlap of like background beliefs
Yeah.
that you agree on.
So I agree, and it is part of my background knowledge. It is part of my background knowledge that this sort of radical relativist approach is straightforwardly irrational, and I think it might be inconsistent too, because
Yeah, but if that's in your background, what if somebody doesn't share that in your background?
yeah, that's an irrational person.
Right, but how would they be irrational then? If they don't share your background,
By
you
agreeing
would
with
just
me.
say that by my background they will be irrational, right?
No, they would be rational by agreeing with me. Because
No,
otherwise, there's no possibility of being rational, and you could hold to the most absurd views ever and still be consistent and rational depending on what
no, but
wild ideas
in
you
virtue
have in
of
your
what
background knowledge.
in virtue of what would they be absurd though? You just
In
said absurd
virtue,
views.
that's what I appealed earlier. I appealed to what I see as common intuition, and I think it is commonly intuitive that having in your background the ideas that hamburgers eat humans is straightforwardly irrational, and I don't have to talk about epistemology
Yeah,
and
but
background
why are
knowledge to say
common
that.
intuitions justified though?
What do you mean?
Well, I ask you now, in virtue of what would they be absurdities? And you just said, in virtue of common intuitions. And I said, why is something absurd if it's not in accord with a common intuition?
Because that would be in the background knowledge, right?
Right. So then you're just saying you take it as a hinge that like common intuitions are justifiers or something. Or like a
No,
belief is only reasonable if it's in accord with common
I'm not sure I'm
intuitions.
using it as a justifier. I'm saying and
No,
I'm
sorry. What you're
yeah.
saying is that a belief can only be held in the foreground, reasonably so, if it's in accord with a common intuition.
Yeah, look. The crux of this is going to be this: our intuitions are going to clash at some point, but then there is a certain limit which I think,
Mm-hmm.
an appeal to this radical kind of relativism about the degree in which our intuitions can differ is just going to raise everybody's
Yeah,
eyebrows,
but what
and
determines what
that's going
that
to be
limit
based on
is?
intuition.
Wait,
Yeah, that's
what
me, my
that
background,
limit is just going to be a further hinge in the background, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, listen, I'm
What
agreeing
if I
with you.
don't have that? What if I don't have that hinge in my background?
Yes, but then look, then that I'm agreeing with you. I am telling you, then for me, and what I regard as the majority of sane humans, you will be straightforwardly irrational, and that will depend on my background. Now, your background doesn't tell you that. I wish you all the best, man. That's not the point.
Yeah,
I mean, that's where
that's
we
just
part
to
ways.
agree with me. All you're saying is that given these hinges, you would be rational. But if you don't have these hinges, you wouldn't be rational. How
Yeah.
is that disagreeing with my relativism?
What do you mean? I'm not saying you're not irrational. I'm saying you are irrational whether or not you agree with me.
Right. So then my question is going to be in virtue of what am I rational if I have a different hinge than you do?
I mean, you're delusional if you think that hamburgers eat
Yeah,
humans.
in virtue of what am I delusional that I have different hinges than you do?
It's straightforwardly obvious. It's just
Yeah, what
basic.
does that
It's just
mean?
properly basic.
Yeah, but okay, so
If I tell you what it
what
means,
does it
the defeats the
mean? What
purpose
does
of
it
it being
mean for something
basic.
to be prop? Okay, I understand now. So now you're just going back to foundationalism. What you're just saying is that for you, just take it to be properly basic. That if you hold this view, you're like, sorry, you just take it to be properly basic that this proposition that hamburgers can eat humans is false. But then I'm asking you, what does properly mean when you say
Yeah,
it's
I
properly
can't
basic?
zap it into your head, so I can't zap
No, but what does
that.
properly mean? When you say properly basic, what does properly mean?
What do you mean?
Does it
I
mean
don't get
something
it.
other than justified?
Well,
You
I
said
don't
the
mean
belief is
justify.
No, you just said the
Okay,
belief
okay,
is
okay,
properly basic. What's the
okay.
difference
Yeah, yeah,
between a basic belief and a properly basic
yeah, yeah.
belief?
That's a good point. Scratch that, right? So what I meant was that it would be part of my non-inferential background knowledge that
Hmm.
certain holding to certain seemingly absurd and nonsensical axioms just renders a person delusional and irrational. That person obviously is not going to agree with me because, again, based on what I have in my background, that person needs help. But of course, that person's not going to agree with me
I don't
because
Yeah,
think you
but
understand what it. I don't think you understand what it means for there to be a background belief, right? The point
you
is
explain it to
that
me. What does it mean?
background beliefs are the beliefs by which you evaluate foreground beliefs. So it's like
Okay.
you can't.
So,
So
so
it doesn't make
what about
sense.
what about
So
what I
let
said
me
indicates that I don't
let me
understand it?
wait, just let me, Abdurrahman, just let me finish. Just let me finish.
because
This
you
is my
don't
friend, by the way.
because
So
it's
like,
Okay.
because it sounds like you don't understand that um, you can't like if you adopt a set of background beliefs, it's not like you can uh, take those as in the foreground as subject to inquiry. Right? So when you're saying it's like you think it sounds intense when you say something like, oh, if someone had this background belief, like I forgot what it was you said,
hamburgers
then
can eat humans.
hamburgers can eat humans, that would be like nonsense or something. But I think you're just not internalizing the understanding of it as a background belief. Because if you understand it as a background belief, then it's obviously not absurd, right? Because if that were the belief by which you do evaluation, there's no way it could be absurd. It's a belief by which you do evaluation. And you might be able to say that, oh, it's
Right.
like really unlikely that there's going to be a person like that. And I can agree with you. There's probably no people like that. No people believe, take it as um, part of their evaluative lattice that hamburgers eat people. I can agree with you like that. But if there were a person like that, it's just like saying something as trivial as, maybe someone who takes like
The law is
logic,
legal.
like yeah, or
Indeed,
yeah,
isn't
or
what you're
the
saying
It'll
contrary
be a
to
category. It'll be a category
No,
error.
Epistemic?
I'm just waiting for him, Hatem, to and Saint to get to the point where I said
The point
anything
is
that
just that
contradicts
when
what
you
he's saying.
say,
I didn't say
no,
anything
but
otherwise.
the point is that if you understand the view of like background and foreground, you'll understand that once you say it's absurd or irrational for somebody to hold that view, you're just misunderstanding what it means to hold something in the background, because that will just be a category error. Because absurdity is just going to be a property of what is in the foreground. Because what's going to determine absurdity versus non-absurdity is going to be what you have in the background.
Okay,
But it's
so
not
how
like
do I determine? How do I determine? You tell me. Can
Mhm.
I determine anything about a person's background beliefs to be absurd?
Well, you can take it in the foreground given your background. They're absurd,
No, no.
but that's
Yeah, yeah,
different from saying
exactly.
that it's absurd for him to hold it in the background.
No, what I'm
Those are
saying
not the
is,
same claims.
okay, okay. Let me, because I don't understand. Let me rephrase. Can I take it to be absurd for a person to have a particular belief in his background?
No, that will be a category error.
Why can
No,
I not do that
but
if
Dave
that is
literally
Because
if
just
that
said.
because
stems if that
because absurd.
here's the punchline,
Uh-huh.
if that evaluation stems from my background?
look, you couldn't even communicate with a person like that, right?
That's
I don't
correct.
want to communicate. I'm expressing what I believe
No,
about
but
his belief.
no, but what you're saying is that in
I'm saying
your
you couldn't
for
even determine. I'm saying like the way you're conceptualizing it, it's not even as though you could really determine those types of beliefs, right?
What do you mean? I don't get it. Right now, I'm
Well,
saying in
you can't.
my background determines that someone holding in his background that hamburgers eat humans is absurd. I can't hold that evaluative process in my background, but a person can hold that hamburgers eat humans in his. Are you serious?
Yeah, that wouldn't be like a well-formed sentence.
So
What's not
can
a
I?
well-formed sentence?
So maybe
It,
what you would do in that sense, or maybe in that case, what you would do is try to do an internal critique of their background, right? You can ask them, why do you think like burgers eat
No,
human
I'm
beings?
but you can't
not
do
no, but
that
trying
because
to
their
that
show
won't be.
background.
them that
Yeah,
it's
that won't be. Yeah, that won't be irrelevant.
yes.
But
First of all, it's in
look,
their
here's.
background, so I
It'll be
can't do
like.
an internal critique. And second of all, I'm not trying to convince them. I'm telling you that for me, right? For me, that is straightforwardly absurd, and I'm putting it in my background. Now, how is that a misuse of a background principle?
Yeah, but you're just saying according to your background, right? But you're just
I
saying
repeated that a million
well,
times.
you want to say that the other person is absurd,
But
right?
it's just
Yes,
like,
That's
according
just
to me,
I just want
yes.
you to
your
think
own
about what
background.
you're saying, though. I just want you to think about what you're saying when you say, I put it in the background that it's absurd, right? When you say that, it's like you're not understanding it as a background belief. And so you would just be talking past another person who took that as a
I'm not
background belief.
understanding what as a background.
Imagine,
He's not understanding it.
well, imagine if you
He's
have
not
like a
understanding it like
logic.
relatively.
No, but the problem is, look, what the background does is just it adjudicates between what's on the foreground, right? It tells you what's rational in the foreground and that's what's rational in the foreground. That's all it does.
Yeah,
Now,
but Saint,
it's not
bro,
going to be
you're telling me that I
Uh-huh.
can't have in my background that holding to a certain absurd principle that you think adjudicates your foreground is straightforwardly absurd. I can't have that in my
No,
background,
you can
but
have
someone
something.
else,
You can have
yes.
something in your foreground that's going to render something that someone else might hold in the background
Why are
irrational,
you
but that's just
judging
going to
what I
hold it.
can or can't have in my background? I thought like you're okay with hamburgers eating humans being in the background, but you're not okay with me simply saying that it is in my background that holding to certain principles in the background is absurd. So, I mean, how?
It might be,
Why?
yeah, it might be irrational in your foreground that it's because rationality and irrationality is going to be a property of the
My
foreground,
kid's
not of the
crying. I'm gonna
background.
mute. Sorry, I'll mute.
Okay, I'll explain, because the reason why you can't hold it in your background, why this one belief is going to be irrational in the background, is because that will just be a category error, because rationality or absurdity is going to be a predicate of the foreground, right?
No,
So
well,
so if
Saint,
somebody holds it in the background, so you might hold it that in the foreground or something. It might be like absurd to believe hamburgers or something.
Bro, his
But
background
absurdity or
belief is in
irrational,
my back. So listen, his background belief is in my foreground. It's
no, but
something
that doesn't
I'm
matter.
investigating. Yes, it does because I'm
Look.
telling you what I find absurd.
What did I just say? What was I just say? What I just said is that absurdity or justification or rationality are all properties of the foreground. So those are not going to apply to somebody
Why?
else's
Why do you
background.
say that? Why do you say
Look,
that?
Oh,
listen,
because the
your background.
background, oh, because the background is what defines what is justifiable in the foreground.
It's not
Okay, look, you
evaluable,
tell me
but
you right
like,
now, you
because
tell me
background
that you
beliefs are
hold to a
not
certain
evaluable.
belief in your background,
That's
right?
correct,
Now,
because background beliefs are not going to be the subject of justification, absurdity, or non-absurdity. Those are
yeah,
going to be
Yeah,
things of the foreground.
they're the beliefs by which you do those things, by
That's
yes.
correct.
which
Now
you
tell
engage
me.
in
Now
justice.
tell me. So you come and you express to me a certain background belief that you have. My assessment of this background belief, right? Forget whether or not I can assess it or how can I can assess it, because that's going to depend on my background knowledge. But is my exposure to that background belief in my foreground or in my background?
It's not going to be either.
What do you mean it's not going to be either?
Oh,
I'm
because
assessing it.
in the background, what you're assessing is just whether or not something in the foreground is going to be justifiable or not. In the
Uh-huh.
foreground, you're just going to be engaging in what accords with what your background takes as justifiable or non justifiable.
Sorry.
It's not making any claims above and beyond what is in the background.
No, in the background, I could put whatever the hell I want there. I think we've established that with the hamburger
No, but the
example. Now I'm
background
telling
just
you what's in the
means what
background,
specifies for the foreground.
but don't tell me what's in my background. I'm telling you the following is in my background: that a person holding to the belief that hamburgers eat humans in their background is absurd. That is
Then
my intuition.
you're just going to be equivocating on what absurd means.
What determines what absurd is?
Well, because the way we've been using absurd is like a property of the foreground.
But okay, so I said several times, I think, unreasonable, irrational. Those don't doesn't
Yeah, but
have to imply.
all of those are going to be the same thing, because what's irrational or what's absurd or what's unjustified are just going to be whether or not they accord with what the background stipulates or not.
Exactly, and
But
my
that's
background is
but what
stipulating
uh-huh.
the fault. What I just said.
No, but when we say what the background stipulates, we're talking about the foreground. So we're just saying that
Yeah,
in whatever situation in which this thing is the background, these things are going to be absurd or irrational, so on. But
Okay,
in
so
somebody
Saint,
else's,
help me out,
but
bro.
in somebody else,
Help me out, because
yeah,
maybe I don't
but I'm trying.
understand you.
Yeah,
So
I'm getting you
tell
there.
me
Just listen. So when we say that like the background stipulates this and this and that, that just means that whatever you just stipulated now is a background of these things are going to be absurd. But when we're talking about like a different paradigm, it's not going to be the background of the things we just stipulated. Now we're talking about a different paradigm. And so what you stipulate is going to be irrelevant to that. In fact, you might be incommensurable with such a paradigm that you can't even communicate with each other.
Okay, so just let's so help me understand this. So in the background, right? In the background, you're not saying that we can only have beliefs that are used to, assess the foreground, right? It's not. I can have
No, but
other
now
stuff
you're
in the
just
background.
now when you ask that question, you just seem to be confused about what a background is. What do you think a background is?
I think we've been talking about this for an hour, and I understand what a background is.
Right, because you understand that like what a background is going to be concerned with is what is on the foreground.
What do you mean? Yeah, okay. I'm asking you because I think there is a bit of talking past each other here. So I'm asking you, okay, what is the criteria that determines what can or cannot be in a person's background?
I'm not saying there is such a criteria.
Okay.
All I'm
Now,
saying is that what
there
the
a problem?
background is going to be
Okay.
concerned with is what is in the foreground.
Yes.
Just
So
what it means
Yeah,
for it to be in the background.
okay, what
yeah.
is
So
the foreground? What
theoretically,
is the
then
foreground?
Abdul isn't he's not wrong then, because Abdul could just be like, okay, like if there's no criteria as to what can be in the background or the foreground, but all you're saying is that the background is concerned with the foreground, then literally he could just put anything there and that's fine.
That's my
So
point.
like,
That's my point.
No,
Thank
but the
you for that.
background, look, what the background is going to be concerned with is what's in the foreground. And the
yeah,
foreground is
yeah,
just
no, but
going
he's
to
not
it's going
denying
to
that
be in
though.
accord with what's in the background.
Yeah, he's not
Right.
rejecting that. He's saying, look, that like theoretically, like what's in my background could be in your foreground. So he can say, look, I can say that like that's like absurd because that's
Yeah,
in
but it
my
would absurd
background.
given it would be absurd to you given your background, but it wouldn't be absurd given my background.
But Saint, you must have heard me say that. I mean, for me, like a million times. Come on. I mean,
No, but I'm not denying that. Look, all I'm saying is that the things you stipulate in your background is what's gonna determine what's absurd and not absurd and so on. But we would all agree that given that background, those things would be absurd.
Well,
It's just the
I
case
think
that
there's
that's
a
not.
mistake. I think there's a mistake because they're saying it's absurd, but they're not. They're not saying. They're trying to say something deeper than that. They're saying it's absurd qua background
Given any,
belief.
but yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But
what I'm.
yeah,
What
but
I'm
if you're
saying
saying
is
it's
that
absurd qua background belief, then you're just speaking gibberish, right?
then you're just
Dave,
that's a category error. That's what I've been saying. Look, all the only once you say it's an absurdity or irrational and justified, you're just saying that in the foreground these things are going to be these things. But in that case, if somebody takes this in the background, regardless what you have in the background, is not going to be relevant to them.
yeah, but that all obviously depends on my criteria for what can and cannot go in the background, which is
No,
going
but
to
the
depend on
background
my background.
determines. No, but the background defines what is justified in the foreground.
Yeah, but
You can't
look.
divorce the background from the
Listen.
foreground and apply it to
Let's
a
take
different
this to
paradigm.
basics, Saint. Let's take this to basics. You tell me, you're an epistemic relativist, right? So if you're consistent, you tell me what I ought, right? Considering your epistemic relativism, what I ought to hold as a criteria to determine what can or cannot go in people's background.
Oh, I'm not talking about any odds. I'm just saying that you're not understanding what's meant
Exactly.
by
If you
background.
don't have that ought and you're a relativist, then
Yeah,
I
but then
would
you're just
expect some
equivocating.
consistency.
No, but then you're just equivocating
Equivocating on what?
on what's meant by background and what's
Why
meant
am
by
I
absurdity
equivocating?
and
You're a
justification.
relativist. I'm telling you my background, which basically
Uh-huh.
determines what is and is not a justification and determines
No, but then we're
how
just
to
gonna
assess
be
the foreground. My background has within it the fundamental non-inferential belief that holding that hamburgers eat humans is irrational. Now, you as an epistemic relativist, why do you think that what I'm saying right now is a category error or is inconsistent? I'm telling you, I hold it differently.
because like irrational, justified, and so on, given this view, are predicates of the foreground. But if you're saying that but if you say what you mean is something of the background, then we're just using different senses of the term. It's just going to be equivocation.
Can I ask a
You're just
No,
not
but
question?
talking.
I think
irrational
is really the
looks
crux of the
irrational
issue.
and
Do you think that
unjustified.
like
You
this?
sorry, Hatem, 1 second. So irrational and unjustified, right? For you, right? The background is non-inferential. So basically, in order for something to be, basically subject to rationality, it must be inferential. So it must be in the foreground. This is all based on your background, man.
No,
Look,
but there's a
All of
difference
it.
between. Yeah, sorry. Do you want to
I
go
just,
first, or should I go first?
yeah, I just kind of want to explain something that you're like not understanding at a very fundamental level,
You
right?
keep saying I'm
Like
not understanding, but you're not demonstrating
No,
it.
no, but
Everything.
you are equivocating. But let him just explain.
look,
Okay. Okay.
the point, the point is that when you say it's absurd, there are two ways of analyzing that, right? There are ways of analyzing it with respect to your background beliefs, right? And if you're analyzing it with respect to your background beliefs, then it's the same thing as saying such a paradigm is impossible. But if you're saying something like such a paradigm is impossible, for example, then you don't have to worry about whether or not anybody is absurd, because on that view, there simply are no people like that. In fact, it's impossible for there to be agents of that sort. Now, if you're taking it in another sense, where you're trying to understand it as a possible paradigm, then you're not taking it as part of your background beliefs. And if you're not taking it as part of your background beliefs, then it's subject to inquiry. And if it's subject to inquiry, then it's possible for there to be people like that, and therefore it's not absurd, right?
Okay. So I see what you're doing here. What you're doing is you're superimposing your relativism on my background knowledge and
Yeah,
on my
exactly.
epistemology. I'm not a
Abdul, I was
relativist.
gonna ask
Oh my
exactly this.
God,
I
man.
was gonna
That should
ask.
be obvious. I shouldn't have to explain that. Stop
So
No,
being
but
Abdul,
I
sarcastic.
think,
It's
hang
not
on.
about.
Because this is the crux. Please hold on. This is the crux. Because I was gonna ask the same question. So is it like on this view is non-relativism inconsistent? Because I
no, there's
think
nothing
that's
to do.
what the crux is
No,
gonna be.
no, but it's not that it's going to be like a semantical issue. But let Dave go first, and then I'll reply to that.
Well, yeah, it has nothing to do with relativism, right? The whole point is that there are two ways of analyzing it as being absurd, right? One is which, like, a person with these beliefs is absurd. There are two ways of saying that. That person is irrational. That's one sense of that, and there are no such. It's logically impossible for there to be agents of that type, right? Those are the two ways of understanding that, right? Now, the first predicate, where you say there are no such people like that, well, great, then you don't have a problem with anything that's being said. You're just saying that, I think this paradigm is
Wait a second.
impossible. With the second predication, it's just you're just going to be equivocating, right? Which is what was being said.
Why am I
But it
equivocating? What
seems
am
like
I
you oscillate
equivocating
back
on?
and forth between both senses.
What am I equivocating on?
Oh, but so I can put
No, I
so I
just
can
want
put
Dave.
this
I want to
another
go. I want
way.
to go
Yeah,
back
I
and
can
forth
put
with
this.
Dave for a minute here,
Okay,
So can I ask
I'm
a
gonna keep
once
question?
you're
coming back
done,
in.
wait. Let Abdul Rahman and Dave go for a while. Once he's done, then let me know so I can reply, and then you can go.
Thank you. So Dave, what am I equivocating on here?
Well, you're equivocating on whether or not it's absurd.
What do you mean? So I agreed with the term irrational. I have it that this person who holds to such a belief in his background is irrational. Where's the equivocation here?
Yeah, because it's not irrational when you're trying to understand them paradigmatically. When you understand them paradigmatically, they're not irrational.
Who
And
said I'm trying to
paradigmatically is the
understand
only
them
way.
paradigmatically?
Sorry, the paradigmatically is the only way you can understand rationality.
Why? Oh, no, that's who said I hold to that? Why are you assuming that? Because I'm expressing to you my own epistemic standards and how I judge things. Right now, you're bringing your own. I thought we should assess things paradigmatically. Some consistency, guys. If you're going to assess it paradigmatically, then you should ask me whether a paradigmatic assessment is what I'm going for. You see the problem here?
No,
Inconsistency after inconsistency.
there's no
Sorry, I have to
problem.
explain.
No, I
No,
don't see
this is
any
really
problem in saying you
obvious,
have
and
to look.
it's
When you
it's
say
annoying. I have to
when you
explain it.
say you assess things paradigmatically, means there are a set of tools in a given paradigm that are used to evaluate propositions in the paradigm, right? Just like in logic, there are different logical paradigms. In modal logic, there are modal axioms, and those axioms are used, that those are used to evaluate truths in
Are
logical
you
arguments.
assessing my
You
position
couldn't take
paradigmatically? Are you assessing my
what's
position paradigmatically?
obvious. I said it's impossible not to do that.
Okay, so you're assessing my position paradigmatically. Is it important to know whether or not within my paradigm I assess things paradigmatically?
I know you have to, because otherwise we couldn't be communicating.
Based on what? Who said I want to communicate? I'm expressing the way I assess things.
That's
No, but you wouldn't be expressing anything. You would just be spewing gibberish if you couldn't communicate with them.
How? You guys are relativists and you're appealing to this universal principle of paradigmatic assessment. How is that
Oh, I think
consistent? You're
I
an
think you're
epistemic
I think you're
relativist.
misunderstanding the relativism there part, because you seem to
Can I
cash it out some kind of like absolute relativism. Something. What I'm saying is
can I ask
that
a question to Venus?
what's yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so are you saying that if I say that there is no such thing as English and I'm using English to do that, is that the contention here? Is that you're saying that that's not what he's holding to, what he claims to be holding to? Is that what you're saying? That he is
Well,
using reason?
no, I don't think I'm saying. Well, I didn't actually understand your example, so let me just ask you to clarify it further before I say that's not
Okay.
what I mean.
So what he's saying is he's working within a paradigm, right? When he calls something absurd. Now, what you seem to be saying is that you cannot call something absurd because absurdity is a very specific belief within a paradigm, which is the logical paradigm, let's say, right? Like classical logic. Is that what you're saying? And if he says that's not what he means by absurd, then he's equivocating. Is that the point?
So I'm gonna tell you what I mean, and then you tell me if you understand it the same way you just said. So what I'm saying is the relativistic part that I was appealing to is what's gonna determine in the foreground what propositions are absurd, justified, or unjustified, or rational or irrational, right? So that's the relativistic part. It's not that anything goes or anything is relativistic. Um, so when I'm saying that when he says that something in somebody else's background is irrational, he's just going to be committing a category error because the predicate of irrational just applies to what is in the foreground. And the predicate is relativistic in the sense that what it applies to or not is determined by what you have in the background. So it's not such that it allows for anything goes, and you can just I mean, you can define any term however you like, but in that case you're just going to be using it in a different sense that I am, and that's just going to be an equivocation. So that's what I meant.
So are you saying that you guys won't be able to communicate because he's understanding absurd in a different sense?
Well,
Is
it's going to
that
be hard to see how you can communicate if you don't have at least like a sufficient overlap in the background. What would it even mean to communicate then?
But this is not really
Abdul?
about
Sorry, take it from
communicating.
here.
This
Yeah.
is about accepting that within my paradigm, and how my method of communication is set up and expressing my epistemic standards, I regard something as rational versus irrational based on certain background beliefs. That should
In
be
the
simple and
foreground.
straightforward to understand, right? Right. So that shouldn't be difficult to understand.
In the
Now,
foreground.
yeah, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is right now, the communication part, what you're basically talking about is actually assessment, as in we can't agree on a common ground through which we can assess theories based on certain epistemic standards because we disagree on those standards. But what you're not saying is that, hey, I can't understand what Abdul is saying right now about this background belief that he has about irrational hamburger eating people
No, but no.
because you're not
Sorry, I didn't
saying
mean to cut
that.
you off. I'll let you finish. So the problem here that you just made is that if me and you can't even communicate, that just means that our paradigm are incommensurable.
Well,
If
there's
our
no
paradigms are
disagreement,
incommensurable,
right?
right? If our paradigm is commensurable, you couldn't say whether or not what I have in the background is justified or unjustified because it won't even be accessible because our paradigms are incommensurable.
I know, but man, I know. But the point is, you can understand that based on that other paradigm that isn't commensurable with yours, that there is a certain way of assessing things that differs from yours. That's not difficult to understand. You
can do
don't see
that
it.
if they're completely incommensurable.
You can understand the words coming out of the person's mouth with regard to what he does or does not find irrational.
Not if they're
That's all you need.
incommensurable.
Well, okay, so tell me
You
tell
can,
me what you don't understand
well,
about the standard I just
see
gave.
What it means to be
well,
incommensurable.
look, but I don't take it that we're incommensurable. The point is that if there wasn't a sufficient degree of commensurability, communication wouldn't be possible. And if communication wouldn't be possible, I couldn't assess even what the propositions is, given whatever set of propositions that make up your paradigm are, as compared to mine.
I mean, for us to be incommensurable could really, and in this context, should mean that we just don't have the common epistemic tools through which we can assess something. It does not mean we cannot grasp the meaning of a proposition that falls under that incommensurable paradigm. It doesn't mean that the words aren't understood. I mean, I think there's a serious difference there.
No, but the problem is it's hard to see how the words can be understood without at least agreeing on some things in the background that we hold to be
I'm not saying that everything is agreed
like how language works and inferences and
fine,
sentence structures and so on. Those are
Yeah.
not going to be linguistical agreements.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Of
but
course,
say,
there has to be something
all
in
he
the
could
background.
agree with is that like what's in the background is concerned with what's in the foreground. I mean, it seemed like the principle that was required to even hold to this view. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, I think
but the point I was just driven is that if our views are incommensurable, communication wouldn't be available. But now when you say, of course, you're just saying, yeah, you agree with the point that there should be enough overlap on the background beliefs that we at least agree on like syntax and so on to allow communication.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we already agreed with that. Yeah.
Right. So, but there's going to be another problem, right? Because we at least have to agree on how to rationally interpret another or not in order for communication to be available. Because how else would you know what I mean when I'm talking to you unless you have such a hermeneutic? And how would I be able to communicate with you unless I have such a hermeneutic? And if there's no overlap, then how would there be any guarantee that I'm interpreting you in a correct manner?
Yeah, but
what's going to guarantee the possibility of communication, which is interpretation, is precisely that we can hold our background beliefs fixed, because those are the very things we're going to appeal to adjudicate between a reasonable interpretation as opposed to a non-reasonable interpretation of what you mean when you talk to me.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Saint, would you say that?
Sorry.
I mean, this is just Quine's. This is sort of like akin to Quine's argument of like.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So philosopher, just before you go, I'm sorry because I'm gonna just end this. Thank you, Saint, and thank you, Dave, for the discussion. It's a bit late for me, and I'm tired. I'll be listening.
Well, how is it late for you? Aren't you in America?
No, I'm not in America. I'm in Europe.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
in Sweden. Yeah.
Oh,
All
okay.
right. So thanks, guys. Take care.
Well, I'm very close though, so like that's not an excuse. I'm just messing.
He has
I'm
a
just
little
messing.
child.
Yeah. I'm just messing. I'm just messing with him.
Yeah, I understand. It's fine. Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot. I enjoyed the discussion. Thank you. Take care.
Wait, did he end up understanding the? Did you end up landing the point? Because I
don't think he understood, but I mean, to be fair to him, I don't think it's like an easy thing to like grasp. At least the first time you come across it, maybe. I don't know. I want to be like charitable.
So
I think he was like very. I think it was like very respectful compared to like the other ones. I don't know what you think, Jack.
Yeah, I think like Abdul Rahman is actually very civil in his discussions, and I like.
He seems to be the only Muslim I've encountered on here who's not thuggish.
So I had a question for you, Saint. Is that when you say that we share background information, I think like when he was appealing to common sense, I think common sense would be something like we already have empirical evidence for all those things, right? Like let's say when someone says like, oh, just water your lawn, for example, we already have enough empirical evidence which we have built, which are in the background, right? Is that what you mean by background?
Well, what I said is that you can appeal to at least common intuitions for like things like conceptual analysis as like something useful to look at. But that's going to be fundamentally different from saying that like what's in the background is an epistemic what common intuitions are epistemic justifiers. I wouldn't take that. And there's like clear counterexamples just in terms of the quantum mechanics and that.
So is that what you mean when you say it's a category error? Because I think if you use conceptual evidence for empirical claims, then that would be a category error, right? And that's what
No.
these seem to be.
The category error is to apply the predicate of justification to things in the background, because those are the things that fix what is justified as opposed to unjustified. So it'd be
I
like the
see.
same thing as saying the law is legal. Like if I told you the law is legal, would that make sense to you?
No.
Exactly. So
I
that's
mean,
the same thing as saying that, is like logic or the axioms of logic or the other things that you need to have in the background to have like to even have the possibility of rational inquiry to ask whether those things are justified or not. It'll be akin to saying, is the law legal? That's what I'm saying. Now, is that what you had in mind, Josh, or were we talking about different things, just to make sure?
Yeah, that was. I mean, yeah, I think the incommensurability point was more what I was targeting when I was talking to him, though.
Yeah, but you were trying to run like Davidson's argument, right?
Yeah, I'm probably not the most adept at running up.
No, but that was what you were trying to run.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
Saint, I got to give you a hand. You know your stuff.
Wait, who?
You do.
Saint.
Oh, I know my
You.
stuff. Oh, no, me, I'm like
Who?
a dumbass. I'm not even white.
Are you a white belt or a black?
I'm just
Are you a white?
messing.
Are you a white belt or a black belt?
No, I would be like a black belt, but I mean, like I'm not white skinned.
I don't care.
I'm just messing. I'm just joking with you. I'm just joking.
Oh, okay. Just yeah. I need you to I don't know. Where do I start, man? Are you read a lot of papers, or you have a degree, or PhD, or what?
No,
Masters?
I just have a master's and not a PhD.
Oh, what school?
Oh, do you know
Oh,
Western?
you can't tell that. Okay, I guess.
No. I don't mind telling that because I don't live in the country, but it's from Western Ontario, London, if you know where that is.
Oh,
It's from
London,
Canada.
yeah. They got some smart guys.
London.
London, Canada, though, not London,
You
UK.
thought you meant Europe, bro.
London, Canada. What the hell?
Yeah, London. It's a city in Ontario. It's a city in Ontario, not like London, UK.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate it. I might watch it and take notes. I keep saying that, but I'm kind of lazy. That's probably my problem.